Chapter 32. About 16 hours later, I sat on the floor of the new hideout, eating a bowl of oatmeal sprinkled with raisins, harm's-way diodes flashing on my leg and side. We'd had to leave most of our good food behind, and were relying on storage that had been packed in the bolt hole. The other reckoners gave me space. I found that odd, since they'd all known Megan longer than I had. It wasn't like she and I had actually shared anything special, even if she had begun warming up to me. In fact, as I looked back on it, my reaction to her death seemed silly. I was just a boy with a crush. It still hurt, though. Badly. "Hey, Prof," Cody said, sitting in front of a laptop. "You should see this, mate." "Mate?" Prof asked. "I've got a little bit of Australian in me," Cody said. "My father's grandfather was 1/4 Aussie. Been meaning to try it out for a spin." "You're a bizarre little man, Cody," Prof said. He was back to his normal self for the most part, maybe a little more solemn today. So were the rest of them, even Cody. Losing a teammate wasn't a pleasant experience, though I got the sense that they'd been through all of this before. Prof studied the screen for a moment, then raised an eyebrow. Cody tapped, then tapped again. "What is it?" Tia asked. Cody turned the laptop around. None of us had chairs, we were all just sitting on our bedrolls. Even though this hideout was smaller than the other, it still felt empty to me. There weren't enough of us. The screen was blue, with simple block letters in black. "Pick a time and location. I will come." "This," Cody said, "is all people can see on any one of the 100 entertainment channels in Steelheart's network. It's displayed on every mobile that logs on and on every information screen in the city. Something makes me think we got through to him." Prof smiled. "This is good. He's letting us pick the place for the fight." "He usually does that," I said, staring into my oatmeal. "He let Faultline choose. He thinks it sends a message. This city is his, and he doesn't care if you try to find a place that gives you the better ground. He'll kill you anyway." "I just wish I didn't feel blind," Tia said. She was sitting in the far corner with her data pad. It had her mobile stuck to the back of it, so its display expanded what was on the mobile screen. "It's baffling. How did they find out that I'd hacked their camera system? I'm locked out on all sides, every hole plugged. I can't see a thing of what's going on in the city." "We'll pick a place where we can set up our own cameras," Prof said. "You won't be blind when we face him, Tia. Abraham's mobile beeped. He raised it up. "Proximity alarms say that our prisoner is stirring, Prof." "Good," Prof said, standing up and looking toward the entrance to the smaller room that had held our captive. "That mystery has been itching at me all day." As he turned, his eyes fell on me, and I caught a flash of guilt from him. He moved past me quickly and began giving orders. We'd interrogate the prisoner with a light shining directly on him, Cody standing behind him with a gun to the epic's head. Everyone was to wear their jackets. They'd replaced mine with a spare. It was black leather, too large for me by a size or two. The reckoners began moving to set things up. Cody and Tia entered the prisoner's room, eventually followed by Prof. I shoved a spoonful of oatmeal in my mouth, then noticed Abraham, who was lingering in the main room. He walked over to me and knelt on one knee. "Live, David," he said softly. "Live your life." "I'm doing that," I grumbled. "No, you are letting Steelheart live your life for you. He controls it, each step of the way. Live your own life." He patted my shoulder, as if that made everything all right, and then waved for me to come with him into the next room. I sighed, climbed to my feet, and followed. The captive was a spindly older man, perhaps in his 60s, balding and dark-skinned. He was turning his head about, trying to figure out where he was, though he was still blindfolded and gagged. He certainly didn't look threatening, strapped into his chair as he was. Of course, many an unthreatening epic could kill with little more than a thought. Conflux wasn't supposed to have powers like that. But then, Fortuity wasn't supposed to have had heightened dexterity. Besides, we didn't even know if this was Conflux. I found myself pondering the situation, which was good. At least it kept me from thinking about her. Abraham aimed a large floodlight right at the captive's face. Many epics needed line of sight to use their powers on someone, so keeping the man disoriented had a very real and useful purpose. Prof nodded to Cody, who cut off the prisoner's blindfold and gag, then stepped back and leveled a wicked .357 at the man's head. The prisoner blinked against the light, then looked about. He cringed in his chair. "Who are you?" Prof asked, standing by the light where the prisoner wouldn't be able to make out his features. "Edmund Sense," the prisoner said. He paused. "And you?" "That is not important to you." "Well, seeing as how you have me captive, I suspect it's of utmost importance to me." Edmund had a pleasant voice, with a faint Indian accent. He seemed nervous. His eyes kept darting from side to side. "You're an epic," Prof said. "Yes," Edmund answered. "They call me Conflux." "Head of Steelheart's enforcement troops," Prof said. The rest of us remained quiet, as instructed, to not give the man an indication of how many were in the room. Edmund chuckled. "Head? Yes, I suppose you could call me that." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Though, more appropriately, I might be the heart, or maybe just the battery." "Why were you in the trunk of that car?" Prof asked. "Because I was being transported." "And you suspected your limo might be attacked, so you hid yourself in the trunk?" "Young man," Edmund said pleasantly, "if I had wanted to hide, would I have had myself tied, gagged, and blindfolded?" Prof was silent. "You wish for proof that I am who I say," Edmund said with a sigh. "Well, I'd rather not force you to beat it out of me. Do you have a mechanical device that has been drained of energy? No battery power at all?" Prof looked to the side. Tia fished in her pocket and handed over a pen light. Prof tried it, and no light came out. Then he hesitated. Finally, he waved us out of the room. Cody remained, gun on Edmund, but the rest of us, Prof included, gathered in the main chamber. "He might be able to overload it and make it explode," Prof said softly. "We will need proof of who he is, though," Tia said. "If he can power that by touching it, then he's either Conflux or a different epic with a very similar power." "Or someone who Conflux gifted his abilities to," I said. "He registers as a powerful epic on the Dowser," Abraham said. "We've tried it on enforcement officers before who had powers given to them by Conflux, and it didn't register them." "What if he's a different epic?" Tia asked. "With some powers gifted by Conflux to show that he can give energy to things and make us think that he's Conflux. He could act harmless, then when we aren't expecting, turn his full powers on us." Prof slowly shook his head. "I don't think so. That's just too convoluted and too dangerous. Why would they think we'd decide to kidnap Conflux? We could have just as easily killed him right there where we found him. I think this man is who he says he is." "Why was he in the trunk, though?" Abraham asked. "He'll probably answer if we ask him," I said. "I mean, he hasn't exactly been difficult so far." "That's what worries me," Tia said. "It's too easy." "Easy?" I asked. "Megan died so we could capture that guy. I want to hear what he has to say." Prof glanced at me, tapping the penlight against his palm. He nodded, and Abraham fetched a long wooden rod, which we tied the light to. We returned to the room, and Prof used the rod to touch the light to Edmund's cheek. Immediately, the flashlight's bulb started glowing. Edmund yawned, then tried to settle himself in his bonds. Prof pulled the flashlight back. It continued to shine. "I recharged the battery for you," Edmund said. "Might that be enough to persuade you to get me a drink?" 2 years ago," I said, stepping forward despite Prof's orders, "in July, you were involved in a large-scale project on Steelheart's behalf. What was it?" "I don't really have a good sense of time," the man said. "It shouldn't be hard to remember," I said. "The people of the city don't know about it, but something odd happened to Conflux." "Summer? Was that when I was taken out of the city?" Edmund smiled. Yes, I remember the sunlight. He needed me to power some of his war tanks for some reason. It had been an offense against Dialis, an epic in Detroit, who had angered Steelheart by cutting off some of his food supplies. Conflux's part had been handled very covertly. Few knew of it. Prof was looking at me, lips drawn to a tight line. I ignored him. Edmund, I said, you came to the city on what date? Spring of '04 AC, he said. 4 years after Calamity. That clinched it for me. Most people assumed that Conflux had joined Steelheart in '05 AC, when enforcement had first gained mechanized units and the power outages of '04 AC had finally begun to stabilize. But inside sources that I'd carefully gathered claimed Steelheart hadn't trusted Conflux at first, and hadn't used him for important projects for nearly a year. As I looked at this man, a lot of things from my notes about Conflux were starting to make sense. Why was Conflux never seen? Why was he always transported as he was? Why the shroud, the mystery? It wasn't just because of Conflux's frailty. You're a prisoner, I said. Of course he is, Prof said, but Conflux nodded. No, I said to Prof. He's always been a prisoner. Steelheart isn't using him as a lieutenant, but as a power source. Conflux isn't in charge of enforcement. He's just a battery, Edmund said. A slave. It's all right, you can say it. I'm quite accustomed to it. I'm a valuable slave, which is actually an enviable position. I suspect it won't be too long before he finds us and kills all of you for taking me. He grimaced. I am sorry about that. I hate it terribly when people fight over me. All this time, I said. Sparks! Steelheart couldn't let it be known what he was doing to Conflux. In New Chicago, epics were all but sacred. The more powerful they were, the more rights they had. It was the foundation of the government. The epics lived by the pecking order because they knew, even if they were at the bottom, they were still far more important than the ordinary people. But here was an epic who was a slave, nothing more than a power plant. This had huge ramifications for everyone in New Chicago. Steelheart was a liar. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, I thought. I mean, after everything else he's done, this is a minor issue. Still, it seemed pretty important. Or maybe I was just latching on to the first thing that drew my attention away from Megan. Shut it down, Prof said. Excuse me, Edmund said. Shut down what? You're a gifter, Prof said. A transference epic. Draw your power back from the people you've given it to. Remove it from the mechanized armors, the copters, the power stations. I want you to cut off every person you've granted your power. If I do that, Edmund said hesitantly, Steelheart will not be pleased with me when he recovers me. You can tell him the truth, Prof said, raising a handgun in one hand so that it pointed out in front of the spotlight. If I kill you, the power will go away. I'm not afraid to take that step. Recover your power, Edmund. Then we'll talk further. Very well, Edmund said. And just like that, he all but shut down New Chicago.